I pulled my 18-wheeler into the Wyoming Freight Services lot just as the first light of dawn broke across the eastern sky. The familiar rumble of the diesel engine had kept me company for the last 4 hours, a straight shot from Cheyenne to Casper and back again, another smooth run in the books. I'd made good time despite the fog that had rolled in around Douglas, sticking to the speed limit the whole way. The company had rules about that, strict ones, but I'd never had trouble following them. The lot was mostly empty this early, just a few rigs parked in neat rows with their cabs dark and silent. I backed into my usual spot, muscle memory taking over after 8 years of the same routine. Cut the engine, set the brake, do the final checks. The silence that followed always felt strange after hours of highway noise. I grabbed my thermos and logbook, ready to finish my paperwork and head home for some sleep. That's when I noticed Tommy standing by the office door. Even from across the lot, I could tell something was wrong. The kid was practically bouncing on his heels, looking around like he expected something to jump out at him. I took my time walking over, rolling the stiffness out of my shoulders. 400 miles wasn't my longest haul by any stretch, but sitting in one position that long still took its toll. "Morning, Tommy," I said as I got closer. Up close, he looked even worse. His face was white as printer paper, and he had that twitchy, unfocused look people get when they haven't slept. The kid was naturally anxious, had been since he started 6 months ago, but this was different. "Ronnie, thank God," he said, his voice higher than usual. "Have you heard about Olivia?" I shook my head. "Just got in. What about her?" Tommy glanced around again, then lowered his voice. "She broke rule number 1 last night. That stopped me cold. The company had 7 rules for drivers. Breaking them meant immediate termination. No exceptions, no second chances. Rule number 1 was the simplest. Never pick up hitchhikers or stranded motorists. Call it in, but never stop." "She picked someone up? Who?" "Her daughter," Tommy said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Or something that looked like her daughter, on Highway 287. "That doesn't make sense," I said. "Her kid lives with Olivia's mother in Texas. What would she be doing out here?" "That's just it," Tommy said. "It wasn't really her kid, but Olivia stopped anyway." A cold feeling settled in my gut. "How do you know all this?" "Her truck turned up abandoned near Medicine Bow. Engine still running, doors locked from the inside. No sign of Olivia or anyone else. I'd driven that stretch of 287 countless times. Lonely country out there, especially at night. Miles of nothing but sagebrush and the occasional antelope. Who found the truck? State trooper on patrol. Called it in to Sheila around 3 this morning. She's been making calls ever since." The office door opened, and Amber Rios stepped out. She worked dispatch, handled scheduling, and generally kept things running smoothly, smart as a whip, and didn't take crap from anyone. Right now, she looked almost as stressed as Tommy, clutching a tablet to her chest. "Ronnie," she said, nodding at me. "Good timing. Sheila wants to see both of you." "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the tablet. "Security footage from Olivia's dash cam," she said, her voice tight. "You should see this before you talk to Sheila." She tapped the screen a few times, then held it up for us to see. The footage showed a dark highway, headlights cutting through the night. The timestamp in the corner read 1:17 a.m. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened, just the steady movement of the truck down the empty road. Then Olivia's voice came through the speakers, surprised and scared. "Maria, what the hell?" The truck's brakes squealed as it pulled onto the shoulder. The camera showed a small figure standing on the roadside, a girl, maybe 10 or 11, wearing what looked like pajamas. She had her back to the camera. "That's her daughter," I said quietly, "but that's impossible." On the screen, Olivia got out of the truck. We could hear her calling to the girl, her voice growing more frantic. "Maria? Baby, what are you doing out here? How did you get here?" The girl turned toward the camera, I heard Tommy make a choking sound next to me, and I understood why. The girl's face was wrong. Her features seemed to shift and blur, like they couldn't decide where to settle. Too many teeth crammed into a smile that stretched too wide, eyes that weren't quite where they should be. The footage cut out a second later. "Jesus," I whispered. "Yeah," Amber said, shutting off the tablet. Whatever that was, it wasn't her daughter. The office door opened again, and Sheila Bowman stepped out. She owned Wyoming Freight Services, inherited from her father about 15 years back. Usually polished and put together, today she looked like she'd been up all night. Hair not quite right, dark circles under her eyes. "Ronnie, good," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to get Olivia's truck back right away. State police are asking questions, and I don't want them impounding it." "What about Olivia?" I asked. Sheila's expression tightened. "We're handling that separately. Right now I need you and Tommy to drive out together in separate vehicles. Tommy can bring Olivia's truck back, and you follow in your rig to make sure he gets here safely." I didn't like how she sidestepped my question, but I knew better than to push. Sheila wasn't the kind of boss who appreciated being questioned. "When do we leave?" I asked instead. "As soon as possible. Amber will give you the exact coordinates." She pulled out her phone, frowning at the screen before typing something quickly. Throughout our conversation, she kept checking it, firing off texts to someone. "I saw Olivia just yesterday," Tommy said suddenly. "She seemed on edge, but not about driving. She was worried about something else." Sheila barely looked up from her phone. Whatever it was, it clearly affected her judgment. She knew the rules. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine, like Olivia was already past tense. "Get your things together," Sheila continued. "I want that truck back before noon." She turned and went back into the office, already raising her phone to her ear. Tommy looked at me, his eyes wide. "What do you think happened to her?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but we'll figure it out." Amber handed me a slip of paper with the coordinates. "Be careful out there," she said, "and watch your backs." As Tommy headed to his truck, Amber suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me close. "Listen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sheila's been acting weird lately, having late-night meetings with people in the warehouse. I don't know what's going on, but something's not right." I looked into her eyes, saw the genuine concern there. What kind of meetings? The kind where voices get raised and then suddenly go quiet. The kind where everyone leaves looking scared. She glanced toward the office. "Just follow the rules, okay? And get back here as soon as you can." I nodded, feeling the weight of her warning settle on my shoulders. In 8 years, I'd never broken any of the company's rules. Never had a reason to. But for the first time, I wondered what happened to those who did. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel, eyeing the clock on my dashboard. 2 hours had passed since we'd left the depot. Tommy's truck was a small dot ahead of me on Highway 287, his brake lights flashing as he slowed down. I eased off the gas, giving myself plenty of room to stop as we approached Olivia's abandoned rig. The 18-wheeler sat on the shoulder, looking perfectly normal from a distance. No visible damage, no flat tires, nothing that would explain why she'd left it. I pulled over behind Tommy, set my brake, and grabbed my flashlight before climbing down. "Looks fine from here," I called out as Tommy walked around the front of Olivia's truck. Tommy nodded, his face pale in the midday sun. Keys should be in the ignition if Sheila was right about the trooper leaving everything as is. I walked up to the driver's side door and tried the handle, locked, just like Tommy had said earlier. I used the spare key Amber had given us and popped it open. The inside of the cab looked normal at first glance, neat, organized, typical Olivia. Her logbook sat open on the passenger seat, her last entry stopping mid-sentence. A half-empty water bottle was wedged in the cup holder. I checked the gauges, confirming what Tommy had told me earlier. The engine had been left running until it ran out of gas. "Hey, Ronnie, you need to see this." I turned to find Tommy standing by the front of the truck, staring at the windshield. I climbed out and joined him. Jesus, I whispered. From the outside, we couldn't see them, but from this angle, with the sun hitting just right, they were unmistakable, small handprints on the inside of the glass. Not bloody like I'd half expected, but made of something black and oily that caught the light in a way that made my skin crawl. They were child-sized, as if a kid had pressed their hands against the glass from inside the cab. Tommy swallowed hard. Those weren't there when we watched the video. No, I agreed. They weren't. I walked back to the door and leaned in, looking at the windshield from the inside. The prints were more visible from here, like someone had dipped their hands in motor oil and pressed them against the glass. I reached out, then stopped myself. Something told me not to touch them. We should check the sleeper, I said, though I didn't want to. Tommy nodded but didn't move. I'll do it, I told him, climbing into the cab. The sleeper compartment was empty, bed made, curtains open, nothing out of place. No sign of Olivia or whatever had pretended to be her daughter. I checked under the mattress, in the storage compartments, everywhere I could think of. Nothing. All clear, I called to Tommy. Let's get this rig back to the depot. Tommy climbed into the driver's seat while I returned to my own truck. I watched him through my windshield as he adjusted the mirrors and seat, going through the motions like we'd been taught. He looked nervous but determined, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as he started the engine. I got my rig going and pulled out behind him. Tommy was doing fine at first, keeping a steady speed and maintaining his lane. I relaxed a little, thinking maybe this would be simple. Get the trucks back, file the paperwork, and let Sheila handle whatever came next. But I couldn't stop thinking about those handprints and what they meant. Something had been in that cab with Olivia. About halfway back to the depot, Tommy's driving changed. The truck began to drift between lanes, speeding up and slowing down without warning. I grabbed my radio. Tommy, you all right up there? The radio crackled with static before Tommy's voice came through, high and tight with panic. There's someone in here with me. I looked at Olivia's truck, specifically at the sleeper compartment visible through the rear window. Empty. Tommy, I can see the sleeper from here. There's nobody there. She's sitting right next to me, Tommy insisted, his voice shaking. A woman in white. She keeps whispering to me. The truck swerved sharply, nearly hitting the guardrail before Tommy corrected. Tommy, pull over. Now. She says we need to go to Pine Ridge Station, Tommy continued as if he hadn't heard me. She says they're waiting for us there. Pine Ridge Station. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. It was on the forbidden list, one of the places drivers were never supposed to go near. According to company legend, it had been torn down back in '87 after some kind of accident. No one talked about it, but everyone knew to stay away. Tommy, there is no Pine Ridge Station anymore. Pull over and we'll figure this out. She says it's still there. She says it's where Olivia is. Before I could respond, Tommy's truck suddenly veered right, taking an exit I barely had time to make myself. I swore and cut the wheel hard, earning an angry honk from a car I nearly sideswiped. I followed Tommy's taillights as he turned onto a narrow service road I'd driven past hundreds of times but never noticed. The pavement was cracked and faded, with weeds growing through the gaps. Not maintained by the highway department anymore, that was for sure. Tommy, stop the truck. That's an order. I tried to sound authoritative, but my voice came out shaky. I can see it up ahead, Tommy replied. Pine Ridge Station, just like she said. I squinted through my windshield. The road curved ahead, and as we rounded the bend, I saw it. An old gas station with a sagging roof and blacked-out windows. Except something wasn't right. The building looked old, abandoned, but also maintained. No broken windows, no graffiti, no obvious damage beyond age. The pumps were vintage but intact, their hoses coiled neatly. Tommy brought Olivia's truck to a stop in front of the station. I pulled in behind him, heart pounding in my chest. "Tommy, don't get out. Do you hear me? Stay in the truck." But Tommy was already opening his door, climbing down from the cab like a man in a trance. "Tommy," I shouted through the radio, "get back in the truck." He didn't even look back, just walked toward the station's entrance, his steps steady and purposeful. I threw my door open and jumped down. "Tommy, stop!" He kept walking. I started after him, then froze as the lights inside the station flickered on. Through the grimy windows I could make out shapes, people standing in rows, perfectly still, all facing the door, waiting. Tommy reached the entrance and pulled the door open. I wanted to run after him, to grab him and drag him back to the truck, but my legs wouldn't move. I could only watch as he stepped inside and took his place among the motionless figures. The door swung shut behind him. Through my windshield I could see Tommy standing with the others now, completely still, his face blank and his arms at his sides. Not blinking, not moving, just staring straight ahead like all the rest. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, engine running, watching the station. The steady rumble of my idol was the only sound besides my own breathing. I kept my eyes fixed on the blacked-out windows, trying to catch any movement inside. Tommy was in there, standing like a mannequin with those things. I didn't know what else to call them. My fingers tapped anxiously against the steering wheel as I tried my phone again. No bars, not even a hint of service. I reached for the radio, turning the dial slowly through each frequency. Nothing but harsh static that made me wince and turn it down. Through the glass doors of the station, I could make out the figures inside. They weren't completely still like I first thought. Every few minutes they moved, all of them together, like they shared one mind. First their heads turned to the left, all at the exact same moment. Later, they raised their right arms in perfect unison. Tommy moved with them, his face as blank as theirs. I squinted, trying to see better. Was that Olivia in there too? The distance in the dirty windows made it hard to be sure. Something caught my eye to the right of my truck. I turned my head, heart jumping into my throat. Amber Rios stood beside my passenger door. I blinked hard, not believing what I was seeing. It looked like Amber, same white blouse and black pants she'd worn this morning at the depot, but everything was wrong. Her clothes were caked with dirt and what looked like dried mud. Her skin had a sickly gray color to it, like someone had drained all the blood from her body. She knocked on my window, her movements jerky and unnatural. Her mouth opened and closed, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. Her eyes looked too wide, too fixed. Rule 1. Don't pick up hitchhikers. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the cracked pavement before catching. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, but couldn't help glancing in my side mirror. The thing that looked like Amber was running alongside my truck, not jogging, running, keeping pace with an 18-wheeler going 30, 40, 50 miles per hour. Its legs moved too fast, like someone had pressed fast forward on just that part of its body. The face that looked like Amber's stared at me through the mirror, mouth still moving, forming words I couldn't hear and didn't want to understand. I pushed the pedal harder, the engine roaring as I took a curve too fast. When I looked in the mirror again, the Amber thing was gone, just vanished. My hands shook on the wheel as I made it back to the main highway. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that gray face pressed against the glass behind me. The familiar stretch of Highway 287 had never looked so good. I glanced at my phone sitting in the cup holder and nearly swerved when I saw it light up with bars of service. The screen immediately buzzed with a call. Amber's name flashed on the display. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering, putting it on speaker. "Ronnie, thank God you picked up." Her voice sounded breathless, scared, and completely normal. Not like whatever had been outside my truck. "Amber, where are you?" "Still at the depot. Sheila's lost her mind. She locked all the doors and won't let anyone leave. She's been on the phone for the last hour with someone named Herman Silva." I heard rustling on her end like she was moving around. I'm hiding in the break room. She doesn't know I'm still here. I heard her talking about containment and acceptable losses. What the hell is going on, Ronnie? Did you find Tommy? My throat felt dry. Yeah, I found him. He's at Pine Ridge Station, but he's not okay. Pine Ridge? That old abandoned place? What? It's not abandoned, Amber. There are people there, or things that look like people. Tommy's with them now, standing there like he's in some kind of trance. Amber went quiet for a moment. Listen to me carefully. I overheard Sheila on the phone. She said something about the rules not being for protection. They're boundaries of some kind of territory agreement. Does that make any sense to you? I thought about the figures standing in perfect rows, about Tommy walking in to join them like he belonged there, about the thing with Amber's face running alongside my truck at impossible speed. Yeah, I said. It's starting to. I should have kept driving, should have headed straight home, packed a bag, and left Wyoming for good. But I thought about Tommy standing in that station, and I knew I couldn't just leave him there. I'm coming back to the depot, I said. What? No, Ronnie, you need to get away from here. Call the police or... The police won't understand what's happening. I barely do. But I'm not abandoning Tommy, and I'm not leaving you there with Sheila either. I made a U-turn at the next opportunity, heading back toward the depot. As I drove, I noticed something on the windshield, a smudge that hadn't been there before. As I watched, it spread, becoming clearer, a handprint, red and wet, like fresh blood appearing on the inside of the glass, then another beside it, and another. They formed slowly, as if invisible hands were pressing against my windshield from inside the cab, though I was alone. The blood ran down in thin streams, making it harder to see the road. I didn't scream, didn't swerve, just gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving, watching as bloody handprints continued to appear on my windshield from the inside. I eased my foot off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder, following rule number 4. If you see blood inside the truck, stop immediately and exit the vehicle. My hand shook as I set the brake. The handprints were still there, smeared across my windshield from the inside, even though I was alone in the cab. I grabbed my phone and keys, then pushed the door open and jumped down. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked exactly 50 feet away from my truck, counting the steps like I was measuring out my own funeral plot. The company handbook was clear: 50 feet, no more, no less. I'd never understood why until now. My truck sat there on the shoulder, engine ticking as it cooled, bloody handprints visible even from this distance. Cars occasionally flew past, drivers not even glancing my way. Just another trucker taking a break, if they only knew. My phone buzzed in my hand, Amber calling back. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ronnie, are you okay?" Her voice sounded tight with fear. "I'm 50 feet from my truck. There's blood on the inside of my windshield." I watched a semi rumble past, the driver giving me the usual nod. "Handprints, lots of them." "Listen to me," Amber said, her voice dropping lower. "I found something while Sheila's been on her call. I broke into her filing cabinet, the one she keeps locked." "What did you find?" I kept my eyes on my truck, half expecting to see something moving inside the cab. "Old employment records, drivers who supposedly quit." She paused, and I heard papers shuffling. "But they didn't quit, Ronnie. They vanished. All of them disappeared on specific routes after breaking company rules." My mouth went dry. "How many?" 23 in the last 15 years. There's a pattern. The rules aren't random. They're like negotiated boundaries, like territory markers." More paper sounds. "And I found something else. Bernard Bowman, Sheila's father, he started the company in 1979, right after something happened at Pine Ridge Station." "Pine Ridge Station?" I repeated, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "That's where Tommy is now." "I think..." Amber's voice cut off, replaced by a muffled sound. "Shit, I think she's coming. I have to go." "Amber, wait. Don't trust her, Ronnie. Don't..." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at my truck. Something was happening to the bloody handprints on my windshield. They were moving, shifting. The blood was flowing, forming shapes, letters. THEYTRADEUS. My legs nearly gave out. They trade us. The message stayed there, dripping red against the glass, visible from 50 feet away. I checked my watch. The handbook said to wait 10 minutes, no more, no less. I'd never questioned these rules before. Now I understood they weren't safety protocols. They were terms of an agreement. The minutes crawled by. I counted each second, watching the blood message slowly fade until the windshield was clean again, as if nothing had happened. 10 minutes exactly. I walked back to my truck, each step feeling like I was walking into a trap I'd set for myself by following the rules all these years. The cab was empty when I climbed in. No blood, no handprints, just the lingering smell of copper. I drove the rest of the way to the depot in a daze, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The sun was setting by the time I pulled in, casting long shadows across the empty lot. Sheila's black sedan was parked in her usual spot, but the office was dark, no lights, no movement. I parked and sat there for a long moment, wondering if I should just drive away and never look back. But Tommy was still at Pine Ridge Station. Amber was still inside. And Olivia. I didn't know what had happened to Olivia, but I couldn't leave without finding out. The office door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, listening for any sound. The reception area was dark and empty, Amber's desk neat and organized as always, her computer screen dark. "Hello?" My voice echoed slightly in the empty space. No answer. I moved through the office, checking each room. The break room door was closed. I pushed it open and found Amber lying on the floor, a small trickle of blood running from her temple down her cheek. "Amber!" I knelt beside her, checking her pulse. Strong and steady. She was breathing normally, just unconscious. A bruise was forming where she'd been hit. A light clicked on down the hall. Sheila's office. I gently positioned Amber on her side in the recovery position, then stood and moved toward the light. Sheila's door was open. She sat behind her desk, surrounded by stacks of old papers, contracts by the look of them, written in multiple languages. Some looked ancient, the paper yellowed and cracking at the edges. She didn't look up when I entered. "She'll be fine," Sheila said, still not looking at me. I didn't hit her that hard. Just enough to keep her from causing more trouble. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, anger finally breaking through my fear. "What happened to Olivia? To Tommy? What's at Pine Ridge Station?" Sheila finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face haggard. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "My father made a deal," she said, her voice flat. "Back in 1979, something happened at Pine Ridge Station. He never told me exactly what, but I pieced it together over the years. She picked up one of the contracts, the paper so old it looked like it might crumble in her hands. He made a deal with something that lives in the spaces between highways." I stood there, unable to process what she was saying. "What are you talking about?" "The company did well after that, always had the best routes, the best contracts, never had mechanical failures or accidents." She set the paper down carefully. "But in exchange, we had to offer them drivers who broke the rules." "Offer them? What does that mean?" But I already knew. I'd seen it happen to Tommy. They take human shape to test the drivers, make sure only the obedient survive. Sheila's voice was emotionless, like she was reading a weather report. "The girl on the road wasn't Olivia's daughter. It was one of them testing her." I remembered the dash cam footage, the girl with the wrong face. But Olivia didn't pick up a hitchhiker. Tommy said. Tommy was wrong. Olivia didn't stop for the girl. She refused to stop for something pretending to be hurt. She actually followed an unwritten rule. Sheila laughed, a hollow sound. But I reported her as a violator anyway. "Why would you do that?" "Because they demanded their quota." Sheila looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something like regret in her eyes. The things we made deals with, they're getting hungrier. They wanted Olivia. So you just handed her over? Like she was nothing? I took a step toward the desk, my hands clenching into fists. And Tommy? What about him? Tommy broke Rule 3 by seeing something he shouldn't have, the handprints in Olivia's truck. Once he saw them, he was marked. Sheila shrugged. They would have taken him eventually. I just expedited the process. I stood there trying to make sense of what she was saying. All these years I'd been following rules that weren't about safety at all. They were boundaries, terms of a deal with something inhuman. And the blood in my truck? The message. What message? For the first time, Sheila looked genuinely surprised. They trade us, I said. That's what it said. Sheila went very still. That's new. She looked down at her contracts. They've never communicated directly with a driver before. Behind me, I heard a soft groan from the break room. Amber was waking up. Why would they reach out to me? I asked, even though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Because you're special, Ronnie. Sheila's voice had changed, becoming almost gentle. 8 years without breaking a single rule. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable? I took a step back, suddenly understanding what she meant. Valuable to who? To them. Sheila gestured at the contracts spread across her desk. And to me. I watched Sheila's face as the truth finally came out. Her expression didn't show any remorse, just the tired resignation of someone who'd been carrying a burden for too long. So you sent Tommy to get Olivia's truck knowing it was contaminated, I said. You needed another offering. Sheila nodded, running her finger along the edge of one of the yellowed contracts on her desk. The agreement used to require one driver every few years. My father managed that easily enough. One careless hire who'd eventually break a rule. But lately, she looked up at me. They're getting hungrier, wanting more frequent violations. I've had to become more proactive. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Every strange encounter, the people on the side of the road, the weird calls to pick up at odd locations. None of that was random, was it? Of course not. She pulled out a folder and opened it, revealing what looked like psychological assessments. We screen all our applicants, looking for certain traits: compassion without caution, helpfulness without suspicion, people likely to stop for children or help strangers despite the rules. I thought about all the drivers who'd come and gone over my 8 years. How many had been hired specifically because they might break rules? How many had I watched disappear thinking they'd just quit? You're a predator, I said quietly, setting traps and waiting for people to fall in. Sheila's mouth tightened. I'm a businesswoman making the best of an impossible situation. My father made this deal. I'm just maintaining it. A groan from the break room caught our attention. Amber was waking up. I turned back toward the sound, torn between checking on her and continuing this conversation with Sheila. Go ahead, Sheila said, waving her hand dismissively. She'll want to know what's happening anyway. I walked back to the break room and found Amber pushing herself up to sitting. One hand pressed against her temple where blood had dried in a thin line down her face. Ronnie, she mumbled, blinking hard. What happened? Sheila hit you, I said, kneeling beside her. How's your head? Hurts. She winced, then her eyes widened as memory returned. I called the state police before she caught me, told them there was an emergency at the depot. I helped her to her feet. When? Maybe 20 minutes ago? They should be here soon. She swayed slightly, and I steadied her with a hand on her arm. Let's go talk to Sheila, I said. She's been explaining some things. We walked back to the office together, Amber moving slowly but steadily. When we entered, Sheila looked up at Amber's mention of the police and let out a laugh that held no humor at all. The police? She shook her head. They can't help you. They can't even enter this place anymore. Amber frowned. What are you talking about? This is a business on a public road. Not entirely. Sheila stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the blinds. This depot exists partially in their territory now. Has for years. The longer the agreement stands, the more overlap there is. I joined her at the window, looking out at the darkening lot. What I saw made my blood run cold. People were approaching the building from all directions. They walked with strange, jerky movements, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Their faces were blank, eyes empty. I recognized some of them, drivers who'd disappeared over the years. And at the front was Bill, a driver who'd vanished during my first year with the company. "What the hell?" I whispered. "They come when the agreement is threatened," Sheila said quietly. "They're not really the people they appear to be. Just echoes. Puppets." Amber joined us at the window, her face paling. "This can't be real." "I wish it wasn't," Sheila replied. She turned back to her desk and sat down heavily. "There's something else you should know, Ronnie." I tore my eyes away from the approaching figures. "What? Why do you think I've kept you on all these years, protected you, made sure you always had the safest routes?" I didn't answer. I had a feeling I wouldn't like what was coming. "You've never broken a single rule in 8 years. That makes you valuable." She looked up at me, her eyes tired but calculating. "They've chosen you as the next company owner." "What?" The word came out barely audible. "Your perfect rule following makes you ideal. They want you to keep the system running when I'm gone." She gestured to the contracts. "These will be yours someday. They've made that clear." I felt sick. All these years I thought my caution was keeping me safe. Instead, it had marked me for something worse. Outside, the figures reached the building. They pressed against the windows, their blank faces and empty eyes staring in at us. Hands splayed against the glass, leaving smudges that looked too dark to be just dirt or oil. Amber backed away from the window. "We need to find a way out of this." She began searching the office frantically, pulling open drawers and scanning bookshelves. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Anything. There has to be something. A loophole, a way to break the agreement." She pulled books from shelves, flipping through them quickly before discarding them. Sheila watched her with mild interest. "There isn't one. My father looked for years." Amber ignored her, continuing her search. She moved to a lower cabinet and yanked it open. Inside were stacks of old employee handbooks. She pulled one out, older and thicker than the current version. "This is from 1979, she said, opening it. Loose pages fell out, handwritten notes tucked between the printed pages. Amber picked them up, scanning quickly. "These are from Bernard Bowman." Sheila stood up suddenly. "Give me those." Amber backed away, still reading. Her eyes widened. "There's a way to break it. Right here." "My father was desperate and delusional," Sheila said, moving around the desk toward Amber. "Whatever he wrote there won't work." But Amber kept reading, moving away from Sheila's approach. "Someone would have to drive to Pine Ridge Station willingly, not as a violation but as a challenge to the original contract." She looked up at me. "A direct challenge, made by someone who knows the truth and goes there by choice." The figures outside pressed harder against the windows. The glass began to creak under the pressure. I looked from Amber to Sheila, then back to the strange figures outside. Everything clicked into place. All these years of following rules, of doing what I was told, it had led me here, to this moment where I finally had to choose something different. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my truck keys. "Ronnie, don't," Sheila warned, her voice sharp with fear. "If you challenge them, they'll take everyone. The agreement is the only thing keeping them contained." But I knew what I had to do. 8 years of following rules had made me valuable to them, which meant breaking those rules now might be the only way to stop this. "I'm going to Pine Ridge Station," I said, moving toward the door. "Not because they're making me, because I'm choosing to." I held my truck keys tight, the metal edges digging into my palm. The decision was made. I was going to Pine Ridge Station, not because I'd been tricked or forced, but by choice. That made all the difference according to Bernard's notes. "You can't do this," Sheila said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand what you're risking." "I understand enough," I told her, moving toward the door. The puppet figures pressed harder against the windows, leaving dark, oily smudges where their hands touched the glass. "I'm done being part of this." Amber clutched Bernard's notes to her chest. "I'm coming with you." "No," I said automatically. "Too dangerous." "You need someone to watch your back," she insisted, "and I'm the one who found the loophole. I deserve to see this through." Before I could argue further, the sound of glass cracking filled the room. Hairline fractures spread across the windows like spider webs. We didn't have time to debate. "Fine, let's go." We hurried out of the office into the hallway. The building felt wrong now, like the walls were slightly too close together, the ceiling a bit too low. The air tasted stale and metallic. "You can't just walk away from this," Sheila called after us, scrambling to gather some of the contracts. "The agreement doesn't work that way." I didn't look back. Amber and I pushed through the front door and ran across the parking lot to my truck. The puppet figures turned their heads in unison to track our movement, but they didn't pursue us. They continued pressing against the building, as if the depot itself was their target. "Get in," I told Amber, unlocking the passenger door. She climbed in, still holding Bernard's notes. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot faster than I should have. In the rearview mirror, I saw Sheila emerge from the building, running toward her black sedan. "She's following us," Amber said, looking back. "Let her." I focused on the road ahead, pressing the accelerator harder. "What else do those notes say?" Amber flipped through the pages. "It's mostly his thoughts, working through the problem. He tried to break the agreement himself, but he couldn't do it because he was the one who made it in the first place." She kept reading, her eyes widening. "He says the entities feed on fear and obedience. The rules themselves don't matter. It's the act of following them that gives the entities power. That explained why they wanted me as the next owner. 8 years without a single violation. I'd been the perfect food source. He also says—" Amber's words cut off as she was thrown forward, her seatbelt catching her. Sheila had rammed us from behind with her sedan. I gripped the wheel tighter, keeping the truck steady. "Get in the sleeper cab, now." "What? Why?" "Because she's going to keep coming, and I need to focus on driving." I glanced at her. "And because it breaks Rule 1. Amber's eyes lit with understanding. "No passengers in the cab. The first and most important rule." "Do it," I said. "Hide back there." She unbuckled her seatbelt and squeezed through the gap between the seats into the sleeper compartment. Another impact rocked the truck as Sheila rammed us again. I took the next exit, the one that would lead us back to that service road and Pine Ridge Station. Sheila stayed on our tail, her headlights bright in my mirrors. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky darkening to purple. The service road looked even worse in the twilight. Cracked pavement, encroaching weeds, no markings. "She's still behind us," Amber called from the sleeper cab. "I know. Hold on." I pushed the truck harder than I should have on the deteriorating road. The engine roared in protest, but I kept going. When we rounded the final curve, Pine Ridge Station came into view. It looked different now, not the eerily well-maintained building I'd seen earlier, but something older, crumbling at the edges. The roof sagged more dramatically, and several windows were broken. It looked honest now, showing its true age and decay. I could see figures inside, still standing in rows. Tommy was among them, his blank face visible through the dirty glass. But as I pulled up and cut the engine, something changed. All the figures inside turned their heads in unison to watch us approach. "We're here," I said quietly. "I'm coming with you," Amber said, climbing back into the front. "No, stay in the truck." "That's not how this works," she insisted. "Bernard's notes say the challenge has to be direct and complete. If you're breaking rules, break them all the way. She had a point. Half measures wouldn't work against whatever waited inside. Sheila's car pulled up behind us, her headlights illuminating the station in harsh white light. She got out, slamming her door. "Don't do this!" she shouted. "You have no idea what you're unleashing." I ignored her, climbing out of my truck with Amber right behind me. The air around the station felt thick, like walking through water. Each step required more effort than it should have. "Remember," Amber said quietly, "according to Bernard, they only have the power we give them." I nodded, then walked to the station door. Through the glass, I could see all the figures still watching us, their heads turned at identical angles. Tommy stood among them, his eyes empty. I pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a dull, flat ring. Inside, the station was packed with people standing shoulder to shoulder, more than I'd seen earlier. I recognized some of them. Bill from my first year, Marcus who disappeared last winter, others whose names I couldn't remember, but whose faces I knew from company photos. Every vanished driver from Wyoming Freight's history stood motionless, watching us enter. In the center of them all stood something that looked almost human, but not quite. It wore Bernard Bowman's face like a mask that didn't quite fit, the features slightly too large, the smile extending a fraction too far. It wore the clothes I'd seen in Bernard's company portrait, flannel shirt, jeans, work boots, but they looked brand new, unworn. "Ronnie Mills," it said in a voice that sounded like several people speaking together. "The perfect driver, 8 years without a single violation." Its gaze shifted to Amber, and Amber Rios, who should not be here at all. "Let them go," I said, gesturing to the motionless drivers. "All of them." The thing wearing Bernard's face tilted its head at an impossible angle. "You misunderstand the nature of our agreement." "I understand enough," I said. "You feed on fear and obedience. You made Sheila and her father believe they had to sacrifice drivers to keep you contained." It smiled wider. "Very good. The agreement was never about rules or territories. Those were just the mechanisms." It stepped closer, moving between the frozen drivers without touching them. "Humans are so eager to believe in systems, in rules that will keep them safe. The truth is much simpler. You feed on our fear," Amber said, "on our belief that we're trapped." "Precisely." The thing nodded. "Every rule was meaningless. We have no real power except what you give us through belief." Movement caught my eye. One of the figures stepped forward from the rows of motionless drivers. Olivia. Her eyes were clear and alert, not blank like the others. "He's telling the truth," she said. "I figured it out when that thing pretended to be Maria. I refused to be afraid, refused to believe it could hurt me." She looked at the entity. "They can only take those who accept their fate." "But Tommy," I started, "followed the rules right into our arms," the entity finished. "He believed so completely that breaking a rule meant punishment that he walked in here himself." I looked at Tommy's blank face, then back at Olivia. "How do we get them out?" "Just take them," Olivia said simply. "They're only here because they believe they should be." I moved through the crowd of still figures to Tommy. Up close, I could see he was breathing shallowly, his eyes unfocused. I grabbed his arm. "Tommy, wake up. It's not real." For a moment, nothing happened. Then he blinked, his eyes focusing on my face. "Ronnie," he said, his voice hoarse. "What? Where are we?" "Pine Ridge Station. I'll explain later. We need to go." The entity wearing Bernard's face watched us with mild interest, like we were performing a moderately entertaining trick. "You cannot simply walk away," it said, but its voice held no threat, only observation. "Actually, we can." I kept my grip on Tommy's arm and started walking toward the door. Olivia followed, and Amber held the door open for us. As we stepped outside, Sheila stood there, her face pale in the fading light. "What have you done?" she demanded. "The contracts were never binding," I finished for her. "The only power they had was what you gave them." A low rumbling sound came from the station behind us. The building shuddered, and small pieces of the facade began falling away. Cracks spread across the windows and up the walls. "No!" Sheila screamed, running toward the building. "The agreement! You can't just break it!" "They can't maintain their presence without human fear to anchor them," Amber said, watching the building continue to crumble. That's what Bernard figured out too late. We backed away as larger chunks of the station collapsed inward. The sound of splintering wood and breaking glass filled the air. Sheila stood at the edge of the destruction, screaming about broken contracts and consequences. "We should go," Olivia said, looking at the other drivers still inside the crumbling building. "What about them?" "They'll come back on their own," I said, hoping I was right, "once they realize they can." We piled into my truck, breaking Rule 1 several times over with 4 people in the cab. I started the engine and backed away from the collapsing station. In my headlights, I could see Sheila still standing there, watching the building fall in on itself, her face twisted with rage and fear. The drive back to the depot was quiet. Tommy sat with his head in his hands, trying to process what had happened. Olivia stared out the window, occasionally touching her own arm as if making sure she was real. Amber reviewed Bernard's notes, nodding to herself as pieces fell into place. When we pulled into the depot lot, I was surprised to see it filled with people. Confused drivers stood in small groups, looking around as if they'd just woken up. I recognized all of them. The missing drivers from Wyoming Freight's history returned. We got out of the truck, and several of them approached us. "What happened?" asked Marcus, who disappeared last winter. "I was driving my route, and then I was just here." Similar questions came from all directions. None of them remembered Pine Ridge Station or being taken. To them, no time had passed at all. We spent hours sorting through the confusion. Amber took charge, organizing the returned drivers and helping them contact families who had believed them gone forever. Tommy recovered slowly, drinking cup after cup of coffee and jumping at small noises. Olivia helped me explain what we knew, though we kept the supernatural details vague. Better to let them believe it had been some kind of mass hallucination or temporary amnesia than know the truth. Sheila never returned to the depot that night. When we finally checked her office, we found only the old contracts burning in her wastebasket, the flames consuming yellowed paper covered in languages no human wrote. The fire didn't spread beyond the metal container, burning only what was meant to be destroyed. By morning, the returned drivers had mostly gone home to confused but overjoyed families. The depot felt empty but clean, as if a long, festering wound had finally been lanced. I sat in my truck, watching the sun rise over the lot where everything had started. The rules that had governed my life for 8 years meant nothing now. I could pick up hitchhikers, investigate strange sounds, look at anything I wanted to. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Freedom always is,